Buongiorno a tutti, siamo qui a Lucca Comics 2025 con Jason Howard. So, good morning, and I would like to start from 10 or more years ago.
Okay.
With your work on Invincible, on the universe of Invincible. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to ask you, what did you learn from that experience?
So, The Astounding Wolfman was the series that I did with Robert Kirkman, which was part of the Invincible universe. And I had drawn comics a lot before that, but it was all small publishers, and I was doing it around a day job. So once I started on Wolfman, it was my first full-time comics job. And so one of the things I learned was just how much work it is every day, where when you're kind of an amateur coming up, sometimes you might work on a page at night after work for a couple hours, and then you work on the same page the next night. And so you have time to think of ideas. But when you're doing a page or more every day, you have to be very fast with ideas. So that took me, I felt like that series, I really learned how to become like a professional comic book artist by the end. And then working on Robert's scripts. Robert writes very good superhero comics, very exciting, dynamic. And so it was pushing me to learn to draw things that maybe I hadn't drawn much on my own before that.
Okay. And so, as a follow-up, I wanted to ask, how do you think you evolved as an artist, both on the artistic side, but also on the schedule, the ability to organize your schedule from then to now?
I hope I've improved. On the art side, repetition is so important for artists. A lot of beginning artists that I talk to who may be very good have still not put in enough repetition to be good and fast. And so as a comic book artist, you have to be good. And if you want to make money, at least in the American, side, you have to be good and fast, because you have to be able to produce work. And I think not just American, but that's true in all of comics. You have to be able to produce product. You need books. You need lots of pages. You want to tell stories. And so for me, I want to tell lots of stories. And so if I'm too slow, you
can tell enough stories.
Yeah, you can't tell enough. But if you're too fast and the art looks bad, nobody wants to read those stories. So you have to kind of find a middle ground.
Jumping to another universe, you kind of jumped in the Energon universe for the issue 13 and 14 and of Transformers. And I wanted to ask how it was to jump mid-term, if you want to say, in a series and in a universe that has so many different titles, and it's so connected.
Yep. So I had been doing covers since the beginning. So back on Void Rivals, even I did it. Yeah. And so that actually helped me kind of feel comfortable drawing the Transformers, because I grew up with Transformers and G.I. Joe. And so I had drawn them a lot as a kid. I have drawings of Starscream from before I did, was in comics. Not very good, but, but doing the covers gave me a familiarity with the characters. So when, they asked if I wanted to do actually seeing the covers, they're like, you should draw an issue. And I said, well, let's talk. And so Daniel wrote 2 awesome Starscream origin story issues. So it was really fun. I don't draw anything like Dan, and I don't try to. I just draw the way I draw. But I am aware of Dan and Jorge Corona's work. And one of the things they both do amazing is bring a lot of energy and dynamics in their movement of the figures. And I try to think about that. I like dynamic artwork anyway, and try to push my stuff that direction. So that was just a little extra push to make sure I try to capture energy within the way I draw. So it at least felt like it maybe fit the world a little bit.
Okay. It was different to work with someone who was the writer, but outside of Transformers is also an artist himself. From, for example, if it was different from other experience with people that are pure writers.
Maybe, I think like working with Robert, for example, he may not draw comics, but he thinks very visually.
Okay.
So his scripts are very well written for artists. I worked with Warren Ellis, and he's the same. He doesn't draw, but he thinks visually. So his scripts are very visual for an artist. And Dan is the same way. Daniel Warren Johnson is an amazing artist, but also in his scripts, he's thinking visually, whether he's drawing it or someone else. So for me, as long as the writer is considering how the things they're writing are going to translate into comics, it usually works out pretty well. Times where I've struggled is where maybe writers are writing a scene that might look good on television with beautiful actors speaking, but are maybe not as dynamic or don't kind of fit the kind of comics that I always love to do.
Okay. Looking throughout your works, I think there's a sort of thread with, I would say, a defining genre that is science fiction in a broad way, but particularly with dystopian worlds. I'm talking about kind of Big Girls or Cemetery Beach. So how do you relate with this genre? How do you think the dystopian genre has potential to?
I mean, I love that kind of stuff. And I think one of the things I like is from an art place is it gives me a lot of freedom to kind of reference the real world, but also be creative in interpreting that. So like Cemetery Beach is loosely based on a world, but I could really kind of go crazy with the designs and be very specific on the type of world. It was sort of a
retrofuturistic.
Yeah. And that's very enjoyable for me. It makes even a say boring talking page interesting because I'm designing everything in that space. From a story place, I think it allows writers, and on Big Girls, as I was the writer on that, to think about sort of problems and issues in our real world today, and maybe you make them a little bigger, literally. A little more extreme. And that was really one of the sort of themes of Big Girls is they have huge problems and they thought they could the only way to solve them was huge dramatic solutions that were almost as bad as the problem. And I was kind of asking the question of maybe the problems in our world could be solved by small things. Maybe, as much as talking to someone and empathy and trying to be slow in our responses and so for me, that's the stuff from a writing place that I love about those kind of stories.
Yeah. What I loved of Big Girls was that it was also an action comic, we can say, but the final solution does not necessarily bring in violence. But it is solved with empathy. And this is kind of, breaking point with a lot of American comics where the final clash is also the final solution. So I would like to ask more about this experience of Big Girls, because you did the writing, the drawing, and also the colors, if I'm not mistaken. So how it was to work as a complete artist on I think it's a creator on the project, right? How it was like, and how did you changed as an artist after Big Girls?
I loved it. It was very hard because the project was always changeable. Like at any point I could change my mind, or if I get a script from Robert, well, I'm not going to decide that the script is totally different. He's got it worked out and I may tweak things, but the overall story stays the same. With Big Girls, I did write myself a script, but then as I was drawing it, I'm thinking about, well, how do I sell this? What do I need to get across emotionally? And I might change things as I go. And so I had to learn, though, to stop and sometimes just it's what it needs to be. And I need to move on. I can't keep changing and revising. So it helped me sort of develop a little more creative discipline to this is my idea. I think it's good. And I'm going to move on to the next part of that. And then doing the whole thing with colors and inking and everything. Because I was coloring it, when I was inking it, I felt like I could be very loose and immediate. because I could make sure things made sense with the way I colored them. Sometimes when I'm coloring or I'm inking, when someone else is coloring, I may be a little more precise because I want to make sure that the colorist
you can fix everything when you're alone. Okay.
Right, yes. Does that make sense? Does that?
Yeah. Yeah. And I also wanted to ask another question. It was kind of program, and it is, how do you deal with female characters? Because in Big Girls there were a lot. They were defining the defining characters.
Right.
But also in Cemetery Beach, there is an important female character that is maybe more important than the protagonist. Maybe. I would dare to say.
Right.
And I would like to ask you, how do you deal with female characters?
So on the design side, I think more about them as a character than a male or female. And I try to think like, how do they fit in the world? And also like really with Big Girls, especially because I was writing it, I was very specific. The girls, all their design shape language is all squares because they're very rigid. And the city that they're within, the man who's in charge is very rigid and very boxy in his thinking. And all the monster designs are very circular. Bubbly because they're the chaos in the situation and they're the opposite. And within the girls, the color language is all black, white, and gray because they're very black and white, except for our main character who has red hair. Yeah. And so that was me sort of showing she's in this structured world, but she's starting to think and feel maybe she doesn't fit because literally she was the only one with a color other than black, white, or gray. And so those are some of the things I think about when I'm writing and able to kind of fully do it. And then if I'm working with a writer like Warren, again, I think about some of that stuff, but maybe I didn't get to the point I did with Big Girls. But each project, I try to think of something to challenge myself with. And so with Big Girls, it was that. On Cemetery Beach, it was more, the girl in the book was sort of a criminal, but I wanted her to feel like her outfit is more of a jumpsuit and it has bits. And in my mind, we never talked about this in the story, but I like to predict, what did she do before she got put in prison? Well, there was lots of stuff hooked to that. She probably had tech weapons and things, and it said she had killed a bunch of people. So in my mind, all that jumpsuit was underneath a bunch of armor and weaponry that when she got captured, they took that stuff off, but the connectors are there and the cables and her jumpsuit. So that's never talked about in the story, but when doing designs, I try to project.
You can feel it.
Yeah, like what happened before we see them. Like she existed in the world before we first see her. And so I try to kind of find, that's, I guess, to round out the story in the script that Warren was writing. So.
Okay. It's a lot.
It is a lot. Sorry.
Next question is more like a curiosity. You drew some pages of Absolute Green Lantern. So you drew something that is alien to that series. Off the Earth. But how it was to deal with a series that had for the first 6 issues had a style very totally different from your own. How it was like to deal with this difference?
It was very helpful, and I think maybe the editor knew this when he asked that the story was off planet, different characters. So in my mind, the main artist, but he was telling the Earth story, and then we had this little aside of this is what's in space. So I didn't have to draw the characters he'd been drawing. It was all different and new characters. And it would have been hard for me to try to draw like he draws. I think our styles are different. And I didn't really try to, although I did mention to our colorist to look at the way he colored some outer space stuff and some of the Green Lantern effects. Not that we had to mimic that, but just to try to keep some things kind of consistent. But that was a really fun project. I loved working on Al Ewing's scripts. I think he's a very good writer, and so it made it very enjoyable. And Riley Rossmo, who drew the other half of that issue, is a friend of mine. So it was fun to kind of do a comic with your buddy and,
Comic buddies.
Yes.
The last question is the usual, what's next? I hope in a bigger sequel, but I don't know. What's next?
It's been announced. I'm drawing Wonder Woman versus Lobo on the DC KO kind of line of books coming up. So that should be a lot of fun. And I will be doing lots more Transformers covers and, so look for me in the Energon universe, I guess.
Okay.
And beyond that, there's a couple things, but nothing I can really talk about at the moment. So.
Okay. These are the things we are most curious about.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then do you want me looking at you or looking at the camera?
I think the camera is better.
I'm prettier.
Yeah. Well, sorry.
She's definitely prettier than me. So. Okay. And it's only the first day, so.
Yeah. Sunday will be crazy.
Yeah, Sunday.